Welcome everyone to this talk about SOLIDS and Carte Blanche at Kode. This is I think the third or fourth time we worked together at Kode, but this one is a special occasion because now we are collaborating not about just space but also with art. So thank you so much both for being here, Annabelle and Pedro. Welcome. First of all, I'm even as cold as it is, I'm on thin ice here, and I have limited knowledge about dance in this context. But could you just sort of stretch the canvas for us here and talk a bit about Carte Blanche?
Yeah. So Carte Blanche is the Norwegian national company of contemporary dance. And we produce and present contemporary dance in Norway and abroad. And we have this mission to produce and disseminate. And we always commission artists and choreographers to come to the company and to create. And then we disseminate all over the country and abroad. We also have a regional and national responsibility to bring this artwork to a diverse audience and to contribute to the development of knowledge of dance and contemporary dance internationally, as well as working on international connection, presence, and exchange in a way. Yeah. So this is our main missions. And on this, I invite Pedro to commission for the company this time, for this project.
So could you expand on this project, Solid?
Yes. Yes, I was interested about Pedro's work, and I thought that this could be a good opportunity now to work with him in this time. It was quite short notice for Pedro to work with us. It came during the first lockdown, and I decided to call him and ask if we could work together already before last summer. And when I thought about him as visual artist, but also musician, I realized that also the work he was doing was also a lot working with body and movement. And I thought it could be interesting to meet our dancers and to start a collaboration with them around the work. And then, due to the collaboration that we had already, I was thinking that it could be a great opportunity to work together around Pedro's work. And yes, this came the concept of SOLIDS, like it is now. So exhibition. I mean, we can talk about it a bit more, maybe.
But to you, Pedro, welcome back to Bergen.
Thank you.
You lived here for.
I'm a Bergen person.
You're a Bergen person. But then you left us. I know you're in Oslo, but still working all over the place. Lastly, we've seen you in the Istanbul Biennial and Bergen Assembly and many places. So good to have you here. Can you, just to sort of give people a sense of where you're coming from into this piece, talk a bit sort of where you are as an artist and your project?
Yeah. There's a part of my work that deals with the question of temporality, which becomes manifest in motion. So movement is very important in my work somehow. And something important about movement is that, yes, it has to do with time, or movement is how we understand time, but also movement speaks to technology. And this intersection is very important to me, the intersection between motion and technology, because so much of what we experience nowadays has to do with speed, the speed of information, the speed of events, how fast, you know, our lives change by virtue of all sorts of different sort of avenues of information and decisions and forces, all of which have been quite accelerated. So I find that motion and temporality are a very important category, let's say, of questioning that I've taken on in a series of projects. And you could say that this one is one of them. And in this one in particular, we're applying these questions of acceleration, or rather of motion, to a performative situation that has nonetheless a very strong material core. And it happens because the exhibition is two parts on two floors of the museum, right? So there's one that is a place where the materiality that becomes questioned is that of the museum itself, let's say. We're somehow, or literally, knocking on the walls of the museum in a kind of metaphorical way of asking what is behind these gestures of the museum, the organization, the archiving, the role of the museum. And then on the second floor, which is actually the third floor of the museum, the floor upstairs, we bring a different kind of walls or different kind of architecture that dissolves, and that is a domestic space. So it's a reproduction of a kind of house or a kind of domestic space that dissolves by way of repetition. And all of this with motion and a kind of movement that is not linear, as it often happens in my work. With some of the pieces that you've seen, for instance, you mentioned Bergen Assembly, it was also something that just spirals and spirals, or that has a circularity that nonetheless exhausts the material, or that goes towards a resolution that never arrives. So these sort of keywords are ones that have been floating around as I've developed these two kind of parts of the work. One, of course, has to do very much with like art and how we inhabit museums, and another one that has to do more with questions of the body, and that's where the collaboration with Carte Blanche sort of comes in, and where we have like been developing for what you say it's a short time, but for me it's like very long, to be almost a whole year in residency, almost, with like 14 incredible dancers and really microscopically researching the piece.
But just to give the audience sort of a bigger background on your pieces, most of your pieces are sculptural, often kinetic somehow. They move more or less, seems free moving in the space somehow, and also many of the pieces also involved actors or dancers before as well. I'm thinking about Domain of Things, which has persons sliding under the table, or maybe Sleipner as well, which was a piece where you also involved actors or performers. But how does this sort of relate now, where you're using professional dancers and a professional dance company? Does that change the dynamic on how you create a piece?
Yes and no. Somehow there's always this question of, like, if there's something that moves and a person sort of tending it, there's the question of what the relationship, as you say, between the two is. Is it a tool relationship? Is it more towards like a cyborg relationship? Is it more like a Marxist thing where, you know, there's like a factory and a person that knows how like the machine works and becomes part of that production, that labor? So that's usually been a part of my thinking. In Domain of Things, as you said, and which is somehow like the grandparent of SOLIDS, or the part upstairs of SOLIDS in Tårnsalen. had that relationship between body and mechanism, where the body almost blended into or was like prosthetically attached to the mechanism, and in a way that even by breathing, the space would move. In SOLIDS, we were able to take this relationship beyond this operational aspect, where like the movement of the body creates the movement of the object, into the real question of like, what does a body that is cultural, that is social, that is political, what does it mean for that body to engage in this movement, to engage with objects that, in this case, represent the domestic sphere? And that is it like a responsibility to like keep it together? Is it an agency that it's the solution? And also what happens when these bodies are not in relation to it, but nonetheless in the same space? What happens? Is it like an outside? Is it a community that is forming outside? And what kind of community is it? So all of these questions are ones that more so than ever, even though I've worked, as you said, with performers before, more so than ever, we were able to research that question of the body and the dancer representing kind of all these bodies, so to speak, and helped by the huge, let's say, muscle of, this 14 extremely advanced dancers, right, who have a very rigorous practice of not just exercising their body, but of thinking and of exercising a language and discourse around questions of the body in a way that I've never been able to explore. So we had an extremely collaborative development of the piece in that sense, where even the scoring or the tasks came from discussion rather than from me kind of coming as one does with other kind of work, me coming with like an idea of what I wanted them to produce. It was absolutely not that. It was like some questions, some references, some ideas that we discussed and exercised together, and that kind of struggle and that kind of work with thinking around the body produced the piece as it is right now.
I want to bring the conversation a bit back to you, Annabelle, about I can see where Pedro is coming for in sort of developing this piece here, but how does this expand on your professional fields on modern dance? Why this crossover?
Yeah, I think well, it has been already experienced in the art world, this crossing and this possibility of kind of pushing the borders in a way, or the limit. I think it's, first of all, I think it's for the artist, it's really an enrichment of the artistic approach to really confront the different points of view in a way. So I think this is what happened also in the relation with Pedro and the dancers. I think they start to also discuss from their own points of view, and it contribute to the artwork. So I think these kind of meetings are quite important and makes richer the research, and also create some questions about your own practice. So I think for Carte Blanche, it has been also, it challenged a bit the organization, the whole organization, not only the dancers, but also for the technical team to work more specifically on this set design, which is actually the structure. I think this was also incredibly intense work for them, and very different. They talked about details a lot, and I think this is also a work that we are used to do with the body, but maybe not so much with a set, for example. So all this and I think this creates different perspective and curiosity to different things, also in our own practice as dancer or as a technician. And also I think it creates also for the audience kind of multiplicity of entrance for the audience, and possibility also of dynamic crossing between audience that would come for an exhibition or would come for a dance performance. I think there we have a format that challenge the way we work and the way you work also in Kode. So it's like it's not an exhibition, it's not as long as an exhibition, but as performance, it's a very long performance for us, like to stretch this. All of this, I think it's kind of a dialogue that also will bring also some questions for the audience, and maybe we'll see contemporary dance differently. And what is dance in 2021? I think, yeah, this is all, I think this discussion can be also brought, I think, outside the field and in the art field in a way, I think, yeah.
Because SOLIDS somehow sort of breaks the mold on how you normally would experience both dance and art.
Yes.
How will the audience experience the piece? I mean, in a very factual way, but also, of course, sort of.
We will see, but in a factual way, I can say that what also intrigued me at the start when I spoke with Pedro was also this idea of having an experience, like a solitary experience as an audience, being alone to experience with lots of performers, and in a huge structure, this house, like you talk about, where you have it reminds you a collective, like some memories, or from the collective memories, or some element that you know, but at the same time you experience something that it's not really home, because it's it's all fragmented. You see fragmented images, and also it challenges also your perception of a group as a dancer or performers in a way. So I think this idea of being alone to experience this with many performers was really also interesting for me to see. So now we will see with the audience how they will experience that. But to explain a bit, yes, there is two different moment also that they can experience alone inside, but also that they can have also a second experience, or prolonging the experience by being also outside in the room where the dancers are most of the time. So you have kind of different experience of the performance, because you have different perspective during the performance. So you will change place in a way.
You somehow prolong the experience, whereas in normal show, normal dance performance, you would come, see, leave.
Exactly.
Whereas here you can actually somehow linger within the structure of the.
And you can choose the duration of the show as well.
Yeah.
So it's your own decision to stay longer or continuing the experience, and yeah. So you as a spectator, you can take some decisions according to your experience in the room. So yeah, that's also something different.
This subject is getting old fast, I guess. But taking the time we're in, where we're closing down. I mean, we've been through a very strange year on so many levels. Does this reflect the piece in any way, and how you decided to do it, or sort of this, as you said, talk about this solidarity or solitude?
Yes. Well, I think definitely this piece, or this moment where I commissioned Pedro, came really in the lockdown. So, of course, there is connection there. Yeah. Why I have thinking about him during this moment of lockdown? I think I know, because I think his work, I felt that it was possible also in this period to work with Pedro without asking him to work with restrictions, or yes, to work with restriction, but to not affect his work too much. But it was already, it could be part of his work. I don't know if it's clear when I say that. That I was not asking him to work with the restriction, but his work could allow that easily. So, and of course there is reflection. I think as an audience, when you are sitting there and experiencing, I think you now will relate totally with the situation that we live in after a year. Yes.
I think it relates on this very basic level so nicely with the situation we're in. Quite few people can be in there. You can sort of make this work within the restrictions we have these days, and it's still a full. I mean,
it's full. Yes.
It's the full experience.
It's the full experience. Still. Yeah, totally.
And still sort of also opens up for that need I think everybody feels these days, that art is just not the same on the internet. So it sort of has this, meets that.
Yeah, it meets this totally. Yeah.
So thank you. We have Max with her here as well. It would be nice to talk to him about how he experienced the piece. So thank you so much, Annabelle. I'm really proud to have this at the museum. It's an amazing piece. So
but
thank you
you
for wanting to collaborate with us.
Thank you
so
also.
much. Excellent. Thank you, Max, for coming and talking with us. So you are one of the dancers at SOLIDS, and you're the one bringing the piece to life. Can you talk about how your process has been to sort of work with the piece and better on this?
Yeah, it was very interesting to dive into a process with a visual artist, because it's not so common that you do that in a dance environment, and especially with a fixed or with a specific structure that Pedro has constructed for us to work with and around. That's very specific, because dance might happen in an installational kind of environment in a museum or something, but you're always in these situations you might be next to the artwork, the visual art, or in front of it, or kind of relating to it, but here you're actually really in conversation and interacting with the visual artwork in a similar way as the audience. So.
And how does that work between you, Pedro, and Max to sort of develop that? I mean, you come from a tradition where you have performers who would normally do as they're told, I assume. Whereas this is a sort of your two artists meeting sort of on your stage.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I've had quite a lot of experience working with dance in my background in different ways. Like when I was a composer, I would write music for dance, and then that led to kind of different kinds of collaboration. So I sort of understood what the process was like, but it was really a learning experience anyways. Because I mean, you have to understand that with dancers, if you tell them, walk, there's a million ways of walking, and then why walk? And if you walk one way, it's completely different as walking a different way. And then also, where does the walk come from? What kind of intention is there? And what do you hold, and what do you relate to? And what kind of persona you become, or are you yourself? And what does it mean if you're not yourself? And so every idea of movement opens up a whole kind of line of questioning and investigation that is super interesting to explore. So I became more, instead of coming with like ideas of what they should look like, I very, very quickly realized that the most productive way of working would be to rather come with questions. For the same questions that are sculptural in the piece somehow, or spatial, are questions of dance, let's say. And anyways, I work with movement, and if you expand choreography to be about motion that is not just about human bodies, then we're still within the language of choreography. So I took this as a basic kind of common ground, like we're talking about motion, right, of things and people, and let's start asking about this and this and this. And then we just started talking about every single thing, and how we approach it, what kind of reading it can have for the audience, but also what does it mean to be producing it, and how can I sustain it because the piece is durational. So they're performing for 8 hours or 6 hours every day. And how do you sustain that quality? And that's basically how we developed through all of these questions rather than for instructions. And at this point where we're finishing the process is rather more a way of looking back at all of these discussions, all of the attempts, and map out, identify, give language, give sort of a kind of, it's more like a mapping exercise of seeing what we've talked about and research, and to use that as a score, as it were, a kind of score. A score that is somehow, I don't know if it feels like that to you, Max, but it's very much embodied. It's kind of something, like when you think about the piece, I imagine that you're actually looking more into like what's already in your body than what's, what these words say.
Yeah, you kind of try and make things arise from the deep memory of the research, the pretty long research that we've had. So you try not to be too much about the score in a very intellectual way, but let things arise from emerge. Emergence was a very important word in our research, and this is actually also coming now. Yeah, becoming important in how you approach that score for me.
How does this, as you use the word research on this piece, or how you work, can you expand on that for sort of a novice position? And how do you do research? Where do you start? Sort of.
It varies, like Pedro just mentioned. He started with questions, and he kind of we dove into a completely different approach than we might have expected as dancers. So since it's so intrinsically specific and detailed and very minimalistic, it was, like we talked about all the details and every little tiny thing, gesture, walk, stand, why are you standing there, where are you looking? The gaze became something very important. So all of these things were part of the research that brought us to the score that we now have or refer to. But we went through different phases of the collective feeling in the space, and we discarded some things that we weren't then allowed to do anymore, or we were trying to dive into more stuff. When something funny happened, we just let it go for half an hour or an hour to let that flow, but then throw that away, and just to like arrive in the space. So we went through really different stages in the research, but at the same time it feels like for someone that might have seen only 2 rehearsals, it might be like, okay, they're not really doing anything, but it was really deeply also hard in a way, because it was so detailed and everything was questioned and talked about a lot.
Will it now then be disturbing to have audience in there as well?
I think it will be very enriching, actually, because we're so used to the amount of people that we have been doing the research with, and every time there's an audience member coming in, it was something refreshing, or like there's an outside input that you're not really focusing on, but you're realizing it because you're so used to this general vibe of the space, that any little thing, also in your companions, when that changes, it does something to you. So when there's an outside force, definitely it will do something.
So it will be an experience which evolves and changes both for the audience but also for you guys.
Yes.
When different kind of audience come in, or
So something very interesting in our work is that because the audience enters the space, we had to work out what it means to be sharing a space at the same level as the audience, right? because yeah, we're working with dance and theater or art, but there's no clear space for the art and for the audience. In fact, the piece starts with the audience being wheeled literally to the innermost part of the piece. So you start the piece in the core of the work, and then you come out and there's like a group of people, and part of our questioning was like, what does it mean to welcome people, and how do you welcome people? Like, do you look at them in the eye? That can be confrontational, or that can be welcoming. And how do you differentiate one from the other in the way that you can do it every day for 8 hours? And also, how do you tell them to be in the space, or if someone's in the space and just wants to look at you for a long time, because you know the piece starts with you being in the inside, but then you get invited to stay surrounding the sculpture. How can you feel like welcome and part of that incidental community without being confronted with as a spectator? And that is like, I guess the amount of detail that you're talking about has to do with these kind of questions that some have to do concretely with the audience. So we've had to also invite people to come in all the time, and so we haven't really had this private moment where like suddenly we are ready to show the world, because the world somehow has been so integral to the kind of material we're producing inside. And that's been fascinating, challenging, hard, but and we'll have to work through the piece on it. I think we're gonna be still accepting that the first weeks of the work or first instances of the work will be part of the producing of it as well.
You talked a bit about having audience in, and that changes everything, but also how we talked slightly about it a few minutes back about the corona situation as well. How do you think that sort of reflects on the piece?
I mean, fortunately for me, this is like not a corona thing at all. Luckily, a lot of my work has been done for different numbers of audience. So I come from doing a piece for just 4 or 3 people at a time, and I've been developing a practice where audienceship is exercised in these kind of different numbers, and it means something to be in a small group or in a big group, because also that helps you identify in that sort of community of viewers. And I had been fantasizing for a long time about being this kind of lonely spectator, lonely audience in a universe that you understand is being produced with a lot of people and with a big network of efforts surrounding you, but that you experience in a kind of solitude. And in that sense, it worked out with the current situations, let's say, to a degree, right? Because still, it's not nice to be in a world, to come from a world that is so anxious, right? There's still that would be nice not to have. But yeah, in terms of the infection, and like the baseline of the infection risk, it's good to have this kind of format, right? Yeah. And in a way, I'll tell you why it's better that it's happening in Corona for me. That the piece, like most of my work, is quite dystopian. And it tries to speak to a culture that is accelerated, distracted, dissolving, and still ghostly and uncanny, right? But in this work, maybe for one of the first times, because we're talking about a community of people around it, we have had to tackle questions of hope and community building, tenderness, closeness, in an inevitable way. And I think now I find myself being very moved in rehearsal, because we're in a world in a pandemic, that we are exercising these notions of being close. What does it mean to be tender, or how can one be tender, or to look at someone with empathy, to share a space, to build a community, to have hope. And that came to be part of the piece, and that I feel makes it kind of very relevant somehow for this time that we're living.
Yeah, for sure. Has this situation changed anything for you, Max, and how you sort of approach being in a very physical situation most of the time, I guess, sort of as a dancer, dancing with someone? Has this last year, and how you approach this piece, been affected by the situation?
In this piece specifically, or
sort of
I mean,
in general and specifically?
I think in general, every human being is going through a phase of missing contact, touch, closeness, tenderness. But dancers, specifically, when I see how my non-dancer friends are less touchy and comfortable with closeness, like we as dancers, we're so used to that, to being on top of each other, being like there's less boundaries than in other people maybe. So this has been a huge challenge, and that's why it's really beautiful to be able to create something that is about community, about being together in the same space, and we are actually approaching each other sometimes. So as an audience member within these times, you might be touched, as Pedro says, when you see some people approaching each other among us, because we are lucky enough here in Norway with the situation that we are allowed to still perform and get close to each other under certain circumstances. So yeah, it's been very challenging with the ups and downs, and is it actually happening or not, and how, and who, how many audience members. But now we're hoping that this will all go well.
Thank you so much, Pedro Gómez-Egaña, Max Makowski, and Annabelle Bonnéry for being here with us today and talking about your experience with this piece, SOLIDS, at Kode, in cooperation with Carte Blanche. Please join us for the show. Thank you.